Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We are unlocking an actual linguistic time capsule. We're traveling back over 3,000 years to explore Vedic. Now, this is the ancient predecessor to classical Sanskrit, but trust me, this is not just some dry, dusty grammar lesson. We are going on a highly specific linguistic detective story. By zooming all the way in on the microscopic details of how these ancient people structured their sentences, we're going to uncover their deepest worldviews, their history, and, believe it or not, their magic. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the stakes of Vedic grammar are, well, they're unimaginably high. We aren't talking about losing points on a spelling test here. In ancient India, words were considered literal magic. Publicly speaking, a vow, a curse, or a mantra was exactly what made it come true in reality. So you have to ask yourself, what happens if you misplace just one single accent mark in a magical curse? Well, the result could quite literally be life or death. Section 1, the accent that kills gods. So, to really grasp this, we've got to look at a pretty famous mythological story. There was this incredibly powerful god named Twashtar, and he was absolutely furious with Indra, the king of the gods, who had just murdered Twashtar's son. So, in a fit of absolute rage, Twashtar decides to perform a ritual. He's pouring offerings into a sacred fire while chanting a spell to create this terrifying monster that will destroy Indra once and for all. But this is where the magic goes terribly, terribly wrong. You see, Vedic is famous for its massive compound words, and the meaning of these words completely changes depending on where you put the accent. Twashtar wanted to say Indra's enemy, meaning a monster that kills Indra. To do that, the accent needs to be on the second half of the word, Indra Shatru. But Twashtar was furious, right? He was careless. He accidentally threw the accent onto the first part of the word, Indra Shatru, and that one subtle little shift changed the meaning entirely to one whose enemy is Indra, which means a monster destined to be killed by Indra. Here's the actual quote from the ancient text, the Taitiriya Samhita. Because Twashtar literally shouted, Indra Shatruhu, as he threw the offering into the flames, his words became reality exactly as he pronounced them. He did create the great serpent monster Vritra, but because of that single misplaced accent, Vritra was cosmically doomed right from birth. The monster grew to be massive, but Indra inevitably defeated him. It is just the ultimate grammatical butterfly effect. A micro-error in pronunciation completely altered ancient mythological history. Moving right along to Section 2, grammar as music. So how does this build from the magic of single words to the rhythm of entire sentences? Well, Vedic grammar wasn't just highly structured, it was actually deeply musical and mathematical. These ancient priests cared immensely about how a sentence flowed, particularly how they balanced words that carried heavy stress versus words that were totally unstressed. And this brings us to a really fascinating concept called Walker-Nagel's law. Walker-Nagel was a linguist who noticed a universal pattern in ancient Indo-European languages. Imagine a sentence structure like this. The first position is reserved for the most important, stressed word, the main topic. Then the second position acts as this giant catch-all drawer for unstressed, dependent words known as enclitics. These are tiny filler words like pronouns or particles that have no accent of their own. They just lean on that first word. Then you hit another stressed word, and you finally finish out the sentence with an unstressed verb at the end. It creates this highly specific, undulating mountain-valley intonation. And this brilliantly illustrates that this isn't just some dusty, dead, 3,000-year-old grammatical quirk. It's actually a completely natural rhythm of human speech that we still use today. Take Bob Dylan's classic lyric. The answer, boom, that's the stressed topic. My friend is. Those are the unstressed words, just catching a ride in that second position. Blowin', stressed again. In the wind, trailing off. The ancient Vedic priests and one of the greatest songwriters of our modern era were tapping into the exact same musical phrasing of language to make their words hit hard. All right, Section 3, helping verbs and worldviews. Now that we've mapped out the rhythm, let's shift our focus over to the Vedic verb system. Because honestly, how a culture uses verbs tells you so much about how they actually see the world. The ancient Indo-Iranians didn't view actions strictly on a rigid timeline of past, present, and future like we often do. Instead, they used a highly logical system of observation. They were deeply focused on a linguistic concept called aspect. Basically, aspect dictates how you view an action. Imagine looking at an event through a magnifying glass. Are you looking at it right up close as an ongoing, continuous process, right in the thick of it happening? Or are you zooming all the way out and looking at the entire event from start to finish as a single completed dot in time? So if you want that in-progress view, you'd use the present stem. But if you want the whole point view, you use what's called the aorist stem. But here's the kicker. Some actions are just inherently too continuous to be viewed as a single dot, like the concept of existing. And some actions are just too fast, too instantaneous to be viewed as an ongoing process, like catching a glimpse. Because of this, certain verb roots simply struggled to form complete paradigms on their own. They literally lacked the grammatical tools to express certain aspects of time. So how on earth did they solve this? They did it through an awesome linguistic team-up phenomenon known as suppletion. And the crazy thing is, you already know what this is. Think about English for a second. We use the present tense is, but for the past tense, we borrow a totally different root word, was. We say go, but the past tense jumps over to went. We bridge the gap. Well, Vedic does the exact same thing to complete its logic. To express the continuous concept of being, they use the root as. But when they need to talk about being as a completed point in time, they tag in the root bhav. To eat continuously is ad, but eating as a completed event tags in the root kas. It is just this beautiful, elegant system of verbs constantly helping each other out to get the job done. Let's zoom out even further for Section 4, History Revealed by Sound Changes. Now, what's really interesting about this is how comparative linguistics acts like a literal time machine. When we map out how these ancient languages evolved, it shows us exactly when and how great civilizations split apart. If we trace the phonetic pattern between the ancient languages of India and Iran, we see they originally shared a common ancestral language. But as the people migrated and eventually separated, a massive phonetic shift rippled across the Iranian language family. Their S sound transformed into an H sound. So the Vedic word for river, Sindhu, became the Iranian word Hindu. The Vedic word for lord, Asura, became the Iranian Ahura. This one simple sound shift is literally where the words Hindu and India come from. But it gets deeper, because this wasn't just a linguistic split. It reveals a massive cultural and religious revolution. See, the ancient Indians worshipped gods called devas, and they feared these powerful entities called aswars. But over in ancient Iran, a religious reformer named Zoroaster came along and flipped the entire system on its head. He took the old traditional religion and completely inverted it. Through his linguistic roots, those old Indian devas were recast as evil Iranian devas, demons, and he took the fearsome aswar and elevated it to Ahura Mazda, creating Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. Language literally tracked the birth of a brand new world religion. And just to add a little bit of whimsy to this super dense history, the author of our source material points out a genuinely funny parallel. That shift from an S sound to an H sound, it's actually exactly what happens in the modern Japanese Kansai dialect today, where standard S sounds are very often softened into H sounds. So if you really think about it in strict linguistic terms, the great prophet Zoroaster basically sounded like a guy from Osaka. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Translation Walls and Cow Love. As we wrap up, we absolutely have to talk about the immense challenge of actually translating this material today. Like, how do you take a 3,000-year-old text, which is completely dense with long-dead cultural references and magical poetry, and make it make any sense at all in a modern language? Take this very literal translation of a verse from the Rig Veda. Driven forward for you, he wore the cows and the waters. The men milked him with sheep and stones. I mean, without context, this sounds completely absurd, right? Milking someone with sheep and stones? Wearing cows? What bizarre, surreal scene is actually being described here? So the crucial point here is that we have to decode their metaphors to understand their ancient worldview. The Vedic people had two massive, overarching cultural obsessions: cows and a sacred, exhilarating plant called soma. In this poem, the he being referred to is the god Soma, manifesting in the form of a plant. The stones are simply the mortars they used to crush him up. The sheep are the wool filters they poured his juices through. But Soma juice was way too strong to just drink straight, so they diluted it with milk and water. And because they revered cows so much, the milk is poetically referred to as cows, and the water represents living river goddesses. So wearing the cows and waters, it's just an epic, beautiful, mythic way of describing an ancient bartender mixing a sacred cocktail. And you know, that effort, the decoding itself, is exactly why we study these texts. I really want to share this beautiful 3,000-year-old quote from the Shatapatha Brahmana. It emphasizes that engaging your mind, learning about the world, and understanding where we come from is literally the highest human effort. It brings peace, it brings self-reliance. Understanding an ancient language isn't just about memorizing a bunch of old vocabulary. It is the ultimate window into human history, into our shared psychology, and into the pure joy of learning. Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder. The Vedic people left their entire complex worldviews perfectly encoded in their compound words, their verb aspects, and their poetic metaphors. If a 3,000-year-old language can teach us so much about who we are and exactly where we came from, what might the words, the grammar, and the everyday slang we use today tell the future about us? Thank you so much for exploring the secret code of the Vedic language with me today. Stay curious.